In the shadows of Earth's orbit, a new empire is rising, not with soldiers or sanctions, but with reactors and rockets. And while the world sleeps, China is building a nuclear-powered outpost on the moon. It didn't make headlines, there was no global press conference, no dramatic countdown broadcast on international TV. Just a few obscure statements tucked away in a lunar research meeting in Wuhan, and some vague satellite data quietly analyzed in Moscow. But behind closed doors, blueprints were unfolding, plans not for the next 5 years, but for the next 50. China and Russia, two nations long considered rivals to the Western world order, had decided to break free from Earth's limits. Their goals? Not just to reach the moon, but to stay there permanently. And at the center of it all, nuclear power. In a world still debating solar panels and wind farms, China is racing to install a nuclear reactor on the moon by 2035. Not in theory, not in prototype, in reality. This isn't about exploration, it's about energy, strategy, influence, and a silent shift in the balance of global power. Because while governments argue over borders down here, up there a new empire is already being built. Welcome to Empire Secrets. It began as a whisper, a quiet footnote buried in the technical document released by China's National Space Administration. Just a line or two referencing an advanced energy module designed for use on extraterrestrial surfaces. Most dismissed it. After all, nations have floated space streams before. But this wasn't just another vague ambition. It was a coded blueprint for something far more audacious, a nuclear-powered base on the moon. For years, China had studied NASA's kilopower reactor design, an experimental nuclear system meant for lunar and Martian missions. But instead of copying it, Chinese engineers did what many feared they would. They improved it. According to leaked engineering reports, their new design replaces traditional uranium rods with ring-shaped configurations, increasing efficiency while reducing the amount of fissile material needed. More compact, more powerful, more deployable. And by the time Western agencies took notice, the infrastructure was already in motion. Rocket payload designs were modified, orbital simulations tested new descent modules, construction was underway for new launch platforms in Hainan, optimized for deep space missions, all without triggering any major geopolitical alarms. This wasn't a media spectacle, it was a covert construction of capability. Meanwhile, US officials, focused on Earth-bound crisis, underestimated the timeline. They believed such technology was decades away. But China had already penciled in a target date, 2035. And the implications are massive, because this isn't just a science project, it's the foundation for something much larger, a permanent presence in space, powered by nuclear energy, beyond the reach of any Earth-bound interference. By the time the world realizes what's happening, China may already have the lights turned on. When most people imagine a lunar base, they picture rows of sleek white domes powered by solar panels, bathed in endless sunlight. But that image is a fantasy. The moon is harsh and unforgiving. Days last over 13 Earth days, but so do the nights. That means for half of every lunar month, there is no sunlight at all, no solar power, no energy. Temperatures drop to minus 170 degrees C. Equipment freezes, batteries fail, and even the most advanced solar arrays become little more than space debris in the darkness. This is why nuclear power isn't just an option, it's a necessity, and China knows it. Their proposed reactor is not just a power source, it's a survival mechanism. Designed to operate in near total darkness, withstand extreme temperatures, and power an entire outpost without interruption, their reactor would give China something no nation has ever had before: total energy independence on the moon. According to reports from the Chinese Academy of Sciences, the reactor could generate over 1 megawatt of power, enough to sustain not just life support systems, but deep space communications, research labs, and potentially even lunar manufacturing hubs. Compare that to NASA's killer power system, which tops out at just 10 kilowatts. That's less than 1% of what China is aiming for. This isn't about beating the West to the moon. It's about owning the moon once they get there. Because whoever controls the energy controls the base, and whoever controls the base controls the future of space exploration. Energy is the lifeblood of any civilization, and in space it's the ultimate form of leverage. If China can deploy and operate a nuclear reactor on the moon, they won't just be lighting up a few research labs. They'll be turning the moon into strategic real estate, with the power to decide who gets access, who gets resources, and who gets left behind. It's not science fiction, it's a geopolitical power play, and it's happening faster than anyone expected. While other nations debate climate targets and clean energy transitions down here, China is quietly preparing for the next global energy race, one that doesn't happen on Earth at all. And this time the finish line is glowing in the dark. In geopolitics, alliances are rarely about friendship, they're about leverage, and few alliances raise more eyebrows or questions than the one forming quietly above our heads. While NASA spearheads the Artemis Accords, gathering over 30 countries under its lunar vision, China and Russia have been building a different kind of coalition, less public, less polished, but just as potent. It's called the International Lunar Research Station, or the ILRS. On paper, it's a scientific endeavor, a peaceful collaboration to build a multi-phase base near the moon's south pole. But beneath the scientific language is a deeper motive: to challenge American dominance in space and craft a parallel power structure. For China, Russia brings something invaluable: legacy. Russia's space agency, Roscosmos, has decades of experience, deep space engineering, know-how, and proven launch technology. More importantly, Russia's current geopolitical isolation means it's eager, perhaps desperate for new allies, especially ones that can fund big ambitions. For Russia, China offers what Moscow can no longer provide on its own: money, manufacturing muscle, and long-term vision. Where Russia's space program has struggled under sanctions and budget cuts, China has surged, investing over $12 billion annually into its space infrastructure and rapidly catching up to, and in some areas surpassing, its Western counterparts. Together, they are a perfect match. One brings history, the other brings momentum. In June 2021, the partnership was formalized, and while the world was distracted by pandemic headlines and inflation reports, China and Russia were already mapping out lunar landing zones, transport corridors, and a shared governance model for the moon. The implications? Massive. This isn't just about exploring space, it's about dividing it. Just as Cold War borders once carved up the Earth, we're witnessing the first moves to carve up the moon. And this time, the tools aren't tanks or treaties, they're reactors and robotic rovers. But the alliance goes even deeper. According to defense analysts, the ILRS may also serve as a testing ground for dual-use technologies, hardware that serves scientific missions by day and potentially military objectives by night. Long-range communications, anti-satellite systems, and surveillance tech could all be discreetly embedded into lunar infrastructure. And that's exactly what's causing quiet panic inside intelligence agencies across Washington, Brussels, and Tokyo. Because while NASA is bound by transparency rules and open data agreements, China and Russia are not. What they build on the moon stays theirs, away from international inspection, protected by the silence of space. In a world where trust is eroding, this new lunar alliance is more than just a scientific partnership. It's a signal that the next great frontier won't be explored together, it will be contested, and the side that gets there first just might write the rules. It started with a quiet ripple. Then, like clockwork, it spread. In early 2021, China sent out formal invitations, not to the usual spacefaring nations, but to a carefully curated group of countries rarely associated with the moon. Pakistan, Venezuela, South Africa, Belarus, Azerbaijan. On the surface, these invitations seemed generous. China was offering technical partnerships, potential research roles, and even shared infrastructure access in its upcoming International Lunar Research Station. But this wasn't generosity, it was strategy, because while the US built its Artemis Accords on existing alliances, Japan, Canada, the EU, China was doing something far more subtle, expanding its sphere of influence through space diplomacy. These weren't just invitations, they were investments, political gestures designed to lock in loyalty and carve out future alliances, not just on the moon, but here on Earth. Take Venezuela, for example, a country under US sanctions desperately in need of economic lifelines, or Pakistan, long balancing between Western aid and Chinese capital. Now both are being offered something no Western nation ever gave them: a seat at the next great frontier. It's not about rockets, it's about respect. China knows the psychological power of inclusion. By offering countries a stake in space, no matter how symbolic, it builds goodwill, loyalty, and diplomatic cover. It creates a coalition of the willing that will support China's lunar vision at the UN, in trade negotiations, and on the global stage. And unlike NASA's Artemis program, which enforces strict transparency and non-weaponized clauses, China's lunar project has no ideological strings attached. No demands for democracy, no lectures on governance, just partnership and quiet dependence. It's the Belt and Road Initiative, but on the moon. Because once these countries are invested, they won't just be allies, they'll be customers, buyers of Chinese satellite data, users of Chinese lunar communications, participants in Chinese-controlled orbital networks. In the vacuum of global trust, China is building its own gravity, pulling nations into its orbit one by one, not with threats or force, but with opportunity and access. And the cost of entry? Loyalty. While the West competes for technological dominance, China is playing a longer game, colonizing allegiance before colonizing space. Because when the lunar base is operational and the first resources are extracted, it won't just be China reaping the rewards, it will be an entire bloc, one China built from the ground up. And by then, the question won't be who gets to the moon, it'll be who gets left behind. Officially, China's lunar base is peaceful, a scientific research station, a beacon of international cooperation. But history has a warning: no frontier stays peaceful for long. Every major leap in technology, especially in space, has carried with it the potential for military use. Satellites that guide civilian weather models also guide missiles. Rockets that launch astronauts can just as easily launch warheads. And now, nuclear reactors that power moon bases could one day power orbital defense systems. This is the hidden layer beneath China's lunar ambitions: dual-use technology. By definition, dual-use systems serve both civilian and military purposes, and on the moon, that distinction is harder than ever to enforce. There are no inspections, no surveillance, no global watchdog agencies stationed on lunar soil. So when China develops advanced lunar communication arrays, are they just for transmitting research data, or can they also intercept US satellite signals? When they install long-range imaging systems, are they studying the moon's surface or scanning Earth's orbit? And when they deploy nuclear power, is it just for base operations or the beginning of a deeper infrastructure capable of supporting directed energy weapons, launch platforms, or advanced surveillance networks? The truth is, no one knows, and that's exactly the point, because in space, opacity is power. Even if China has no intention of militarizing its lunar base, the possibility alone shifts the balance. It creates uncertainty, and in geopolitics, uncertainty breeds caution, hesitation, strategic advantage. Already, US Space Command has quietly raised concerns. Internal reports warn that China's moon base could serve as a strategic outpost, giving them early warning capabilities, global visibility, and eventually the high ground in space-based warfare. And while China dismisses these claims as paranoia, it has refused to join international arms control agreements for outer space. It continues to develop anti-satellite weapons, and it's conducted military simulations involving orbital combat scenarios. Even the very act of mining lunar resources, like helium-3 or rare earth elements, could give China a stranglehold over future energy and tech industries, crippling rival economies without firing a single shot. This isn't science fiction, it's silent escalation. Because the moon isn't just a rock in the sky, it's the next military high ground, and whoever builds the infrastructure first wins the advantage not just in space, but everywhere. In the words of former US Air Force General Steve Quast, space is not a place to visit, it's a place to own. And China is moving to do exactly that, quietly, strategically, and with just enough plausible deniability to keep the world guessing. The first space race was about symbolism, a flag, a footprint, a Cold War victory written in dust. But the new space race, it's not about winning a photo op, it's about owning the future economy. Because the moon isn't just barren terrain, it's a vault, a storehouse of untapped resources more valuable than any oil field on Earth, and China knows it. At the top of that list, helium-3, a rare isotope virtually non-existent on Earth but scattered across the moon's surface. Scientists believe helium-3 could one day power nuclear fusion reactors, providing nearly limitless clean energy. A single shuttle's worth could be worth up to $3 billion, with long-term projections valuing the entire moon's helium-3 reserves at over $10 trillion. And China has already staked its claim. In multiple lunar missions, China's Chang'e landers have returned with soil samples rich in helium-3. And in internal state briefings, Chinese scientists have made one thing clear: whichever nation masters helium-3 mining first wins the energy race of the 21st century. But that's just the beginning. The moon also holds rare earth elements, the same materials critical for smartphones, satellites, electric vehicles, and military-grade electronics. Down here, 80% of the global supply is controlled by, you guessed it, China. Up there, they're positioning themselves to dominate that supply too. Then there's water, specifically frozen water trapped in shadowed craters at the moon's south pole. To most people, water in space sounds irrelevant, but in space economics, water equals life and fuel. Hydrogen and oxygen can be split to create breathable air and rocket propellant. A gas station on the moon. Imagine what that means: lower launch costs, deeper space missions, and a permanent outpost for interplanetary travel. The moon becomes not the destination, but the gateway. China's planned lunar base is conveniently located near these frozen water reserves, not by coincidence, but by design. And while the West debates exploration ethics, China is focused on extraction infrastructure, drills, rovers, autonomous mining bots, all feeding into a supply chain that could one day turn the moon into the most valuable piece of real estate in the solar system. According to leaked government budgets, China has already committed $12 billion to its lunar program by 2035, with projections exceeding $40 billion over the next decade. That rivals NASA's entire Artemis mission, which is estimated to cost $93 billion by 2025, but with one key difference: China's spending is more centralized, faster, and long-term focused. The projected cost of deploying a nuclear-powered lunar base? Between $10 to $20 billion, depending on launch frequency, modular construction, and robotic labor. But in return, it could generate hundreds of billions in intellectual property, resources, and strategic leverage over the next 50 years. This is the economic truth behind the new space race. It's not about flags or pride or global unity. It's about resources, scarcity, profit. And the nation that dominates the moon will hold a chokehold over the next industrial revolution, one powered not by oil or silicon, but by lunar dust. The first space race was won with rockets. This one will be won with contracts, commodities, and control. Empires don't rise overnight. They begin with infrastructure, then territory, then influence. What we're witnessing with China's lunar program is not just scientific ambition, it's the quiet construction of an empire, one that doesn't need to fire a single shot to control the future. because space is not just about exploration anymore, it's about domination without confrontation. Think about it. If China succeeds in building the first self-sustaining, nuclear-powered lunar base, it will control the only fully operational platform in deep space. That base becomes more than a research station. It becomes a strategic outpost, an energy hub, a supply depot, and a symbol of soft power. It would also allow China to control access to lunar resources, lease out infrastructure to allied nations, provide lunar navigation and communications networks, establish the foundation for Mars missions, and most importantly, set the rules of off-world governance. Right now, the international treaties that govern space are outdated relics from the Cold War, vague, unenforceable, and increasingly ignored. If China establishes the first real lunar presence, they'll be in the position to define new norms. De facto ownership becomes de facto law, and that changes everything. Imagine a future where launching a satellite requires clearance through a China-led orbital traffic system, where lunar resources are licensed through Chinese regulatory bodies, where nations depend on Chinese power grids in space, just as they already depend on Chinese exports and supply chains down here. This isn't some far-off sci-fi scenario, it's a logical extension of how every empire in history is operated. Rome didn't conquer with brute force alone, it built roads. Britain didn't just take land, it took ports and trade routes. China isn't trying to win the space race, it's trying to own the infrastructure of the cosmos. And if it succeeds, it won't just reshape space, it will rewrite Earth's geopolitical map, forging new alliances, dissolving old ones, and entrenching its dominance not through war, but through interdependence. The moon is the testing ground, Mars is the next step, but the real prize is influence, planetary and beyond. Because in this new era of silent conquest, control isn't taken with weapons, it's built with reactors, rovers, and reach. While the world borders on land and oceans, China is quietly redrawing the map above our heads, one reactor at a time, and by the time we look up, the empire may already be in place. The next great empire won't be built with bullets, it will be built with blueprints, etched in vacuum-sealed silence, far beyond Earth's reach. And as China sets up power on the moon, one truth becomes inescapable. The future won't be won on land, but in orbit. If you want to understand how the world's superpowers are quietly reshaping the rules of reality, $1 billion move at a time, this is just the beginning. Subscribe now for more deep dives into the corporate empires, hidden power plays, and financial forces shaping our future. Your desire, your empire.